Good evening, I'm DK Ronster. Welcome back to the TTT News. The Gestalt Leadership Conference is on April 29, and we are going to be speaking. We're joined by Dr. Rama Naidu, who has more than 30 years of experience in the field of leadership, social justice, and organizational development. And we are also going to be joined by Nanci Jimenéz, well known in the U.S. for anti-racism work, her adultism work as well, and I want to ask her about that specifically, as well as helping to grow awareness in social justice in organizations. And last but not least, Maxine Attong, a Caribbean woman involved in leadership for more than 20 years, and she is the driving force behind this conference. And I want to start off with you, please, Maxine. In terms of this year, why this theme, leading with equity?
2 words, the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has actually just bared all the inequities that we have chosen to ignore before. And at this point in time, we can no longer ignore it. So the pandemic has come, it's actually been showing up. I mean, the CDC had said that the people who are more susceptible to the COVID-19 virus would be those who are less access to healthcare, with more socioeconomic stress, and of course, minorities and communities like that. And of course, here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have seen the effects of the pandemic. If you have to work from home and you don't have computers and laptops, if your kids have to work from home and they are not equipped like that, it makes it so much more difficult for it to happen. We've seen that when the police clamps down on these partygoers, the partygoers tend to look all the same way. They're not representative of all the people having parties in Trinidad and Tobago. So we see in different ways that there are inequities showing up. And the fact is they've always been there. Now that the pandemic has stopped us all to stop and pause and watch, we are seeing that the world is not equitable.
There's a Jamaican saying, donkey say world no level. But I want to include you, or welcome you to the conversation, please, Dr. Rama. And I want to get a little bit of your background or experience on leadership and community building towards a just society at this point in time.
Thank you. For me, coming from South Africa, where we had institutionalized discrimination and racism at the ultimate level, and have been brought up in that space, I had to live and survive in a really tough world. In 1993, when we got our so-called freedom, we all thought that all these things would go away. They didn't go away. In fact, many were amplified in this space. It was those who had power and privilege who still had innocuous ways of keeping that power and privilege, whilst providing a semblance of empowerment, a semblance of sharing, a bit of equity and social justice. But those issues have not really been addressed at the deeper level. And so people are saying the words, but the actions are not in resonance with those words. And so my work in leadership, having come up in that space, is how do we start to get people to come into their own sense of power when all their lives, those voices were silenced. And now suddenly we're saying, come and talk now. Tell us about what's wrong. And when people have no voice, you first have to nurture that voice in a space where it becomes confident, begins to see its power and claim its power. This other way, I think the notion of trends and fashions and the newest thing on the block, the Black Lives Matter, these things sound nice, but I'm worried about how it's lived in the spaces we actually inhabit. And I think many leaders know all this stuff for a long time. It's not that inequity wasn't here, it was always there. And we talked about it and had conferences about it, but I think the big notion is on the how-to. And I think what COVID's done is made a lot of leaders who were complacent very uncomfortable with what they've seen. And so this is a moment in history where we can either choose to stretch ourselves or play the game a little bit longer. And to me, this conference is about for those leaders who want to stretch themselves, who are saying, I'm no longer happy with this. I don't want to play this game. And what will it take for me as a leader to deeply shift the way I turn up in the world as a leader? And those are, I think those big questions are the ones that we will be exploring at this conference. So it will create both discomfort, stretch, and possibility.
And I want to come back to that, but this is after we involve Nanci, please. Now, Nanci, I like the term adultism because all sorts of things are going through my mind. But what is it? Because I sometimes I see posts, people on social media, oh, I had to adult today for the whole day. But what is adultism?
That's not what adultism is, but I'm glad you asked. So adultism is the time that you were next in line in a grocery store and nobody waited on you. Or it's the time that you would have gladly given up your room or your bed for a visiting relative, but nobody thought they had to ask you. It's the person that you came into the world knowing that you were a leader, that there wasn't anything to be taught to you. You can't tell a 5-year-old they're not in charge of the planet. I mean, you can try, but you're not going to win that one. And so adultism is the training ground for all other oppressions. It's the first institutional oppression that I would offer every human being has experienced, and yet most people have no idea exists. And therefore, it's the first time as young people that we're gaslighted. And that means that we know something isn't right, but everyone, all the adults that we trust, that we love around us, the institutions, the laws, everything that's informing our worldview, our perspective, are telling us this is the way it's supposed to be, that you're supposed to only talk when spoken to be seen but not heard, to not have needs, to accommodate, to adjust, to quiet, to not step up. And yet when we look throughout history, young people, if you go back to the first moments of uprising in any global social movement, and this is absolutely true in South Africa for the end of apartheid, it's absolutely true in the United States for uprisings, again, in the civil rights movement, young people are leading these movements. And it's true today in climate change work as well. Young people are at the forefront because why? Because they're the least injured. And I love what Dr. Rama said is, we can change policies. We must change policies. But if we don't heal, if we don't do the work that we have internalized as a result of these oppressions, we won't see ourselves as the one to make the world right. And we will continue to be confused. And our leadership will reflect these confusions. And we see this being replayed with really well-intentioned leadership, even being vulnerable and co-opted by systems of oppression, because we have hurts that we haven't healed yet. So adultism, we come into the world clear of our goodness, clear about what justice is, standing up in sense of our own power and interrupting it for as long as we possibly can until the forces of, often with violence or the threat of violence, I don't know about you, but I grew up thinking that corporal punishment was a part of my childhood and that should be part of every young person's childhood. And I'm here to say, no, it's not, and it can't be. And every time I would try to fight back and the systems were telling me I was supposed to be quiet and sweet and nice, especially because I'm female and I better not make a scene here, that message then gets internalized in me. And then I'm supposed to become a leader that has clarity and vision and chutzpah and wants to be bold in my leadership. But I never got to do the healing about all those internalized misinformation and disinformation that I received institutionally as a young person. And that's where I think the crux, I started my organization to end racism and realizing I was actually doing a leadership project, because you can't have people end racism if they don't see themselves as the ones to do it. And so I needed to back up and look at what is the role that adultism is playing here that's keeping us from tapping into the power that we came into the world with, knowing we were the leaders we were waiting for.
And I want to talk about some of that power, some of those systems, but we do that when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with Maxine Attong, Dr. Rama Naidu, and Nanci Jimenéz, and we have the opportunity to do so because of the Gestalt Leadership Conference that is on April 29. But just before we took the break, we were speaking about systems. Actually, I think through the whole conversation, systems, equity, leadership. Now, Dr. Rama spoke about the fact that apartheid, yes, was finished and there was a freedom that was perceived and there were levels to it. It reminds me of Animal Farm. So all animals are equal. Some are more equal than others. Nanci actually picked up the conversation and was speaking about systems and the fact that if there are individuals who need to move forward or transition that system, many times they are the youth. And it comes with a level of conflict. Sometimes that happens because they are the ones who are less, I don't necessarily want to say traumatized, but they have less hurt that they need to move past. It hasn't been entrenched into their system. So I want to start and not necessarily ask a specific individual, but just throw it to the floor or to the panel. How do we articulate these things and say, well, this is a problem, as opposed to how you were saying, Nanci, well, I learned that corporal punishment was a thing. So how do we say, well, it exists, but it shouldn't be in the way that it's happening, and we need to move past it. We need to get steps, incremental steps to move to something else and beyond that.
Rama, do you want to take this on?
Yeah, I think for me, this notion of not being fully conscious of what's really happening. So the system has so trained us to accept our limitations as being less than in this space, that you know your space, as Nanci was saying. And it's so deeply embedded that sometimes even we don't realize that we oppress ourselves. We can't be our best selves. So for me, this big thing about is having spaces where we can conscientize people to what's really happening, make us people aware of how this power over has made us what we are. And I think it's that shift from the unconsciousness into the awareness. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize when I behaved that's why I do what I do. And I think that's the first step. And then when you're aware of it, even that is not enough. I think the awareness makes us talk about it, have conversations about it, but then it's a move into activism. Can I do something about it in the spaces I'm in? And once we start that as leaders, then I think the journey becomes real for people, because it is a journey. It's a long-term thing. It's not a 2-day workshop on equity and social justice. It's a lot more than that. So it's calling upon us as leaders to take a brave step forward to do what's needed in the world. And it starts with me, because some of our leaders across the differences that we have the best intentions in the world. They really want to change. But I'm afraid there's been too much of commodifying, even of diversity and equity and social justice. And I'm so tired of it. The words, DEI, everybody talks about DEI. I'm tired. I think people are tired of it. You're saying, for goodness sake, let's not make this another peak in our thing about consciousness and the inequity. But is there something that we can really give leaders to catch on to and say, if I really want to do this, there's something I can do? And I think there is a lot that we can do. That's really important for me.
And in terms of that lot that we can do, Nanci, I want to ask you your view on this, please, but also include the caveat, because a little earlier, Dr. Rama was speaking about bringing other people to the table, but also allowing people to help their voices evolve. Because it's one thing, you have a big old table, but then you bring someone to that table who's not even used to being at the kiddies table in a high chair. And now you say, okay, well, speak. And this person isn't necessarily able to articulate their views in a way that helps that go forward. And then you say, okay, well, you had your chance. So how do we deal with that, Nanci?
Oh, I have I don't know how much time I have, but yes, I love the question that you posed here. Let me just say a couple of things just to build on what Dr. Rama said first, which is that people who are on the target side of oppression, whether we're talking about racism or sexism or classism, know exactly what is going on. And this is why we must listen to the voices very deeply and thoroughly to people who are on the target side of oppression. They have been telling us what is not working from the beginning. And to not believe, to not listen, to not slow down, to not validate, to take power over, to dominate is one of the first things that we can concretely do right now. And this could be as simple as, if you're a parent, listening to your young person, when not asking them questions, not guiding the process, but just being quiet and hearing what matters to them. And I can tell you, at first, we use this process in my own family, because I really do believe our first leaders are our parents. And I don't think there's anything we can teach in the workplace or with leaders in the workplace. If they can't apply these tools at home in their own life, then they're always going to be techniques and they're always going to be transactional. And if we're looking to end oppression, we must be transformational in our approach. And that means we have to do it at the heart level in the core relationships that matter to us most. And then expand our understanding that we are connected, that beautiful Ubuntu word, we are because I am because we are. And so I start with parents and adultism for a reason, because if we don't build in these changes in our homes, then they will be disingenuous in our workplaces. So one practice that we do just specifically to address around voices and listening and speaking, I use this practice called constructivist listening. It's a term that was coined by Dr. Julian Weissglass, a professor emeritus of mathematics. And it's a timed listening activity where everyone gets the same amount of time and you don't get to interrupt and you don't get to speak over. So we implemented, I wanted to bring this tool to my family, and we would always do these bonfires in the backyard. My dad loved it. My dad's Puerto Rican from the Caribbean, and this was how we would do a lot of our holidays. And I would say, we're going to use this practice around the bonfire and everyone's going to get the same amount of time. And we would get to my nephews, who at the time were young. They were like 7, 8 years old. And they were not used to getting uninterrupted time with any adult. And so we would set the timer and they wouldn't say anything. And we would have to be quiet. All the adults, we couldn't comment, we couldn't say anything. And then we'd go around and we did this, every time I would come home to visit, we would do this. Well, I tell you, it only took like 2 or 3 times doing that practice. One of my nephews was in the middle of his turn. He got quite used to having his time. And my dad started to interrupt, his elder. And he said, Grandpa, my turn. You get your turn in a little bit. My turn right now. But he didn't shame him, but he knew this is what it means if we all get the same amount of time. I get the floor. And it's not like I missed my opportunity and someone's going to finish my sentence for me, or someone's going to steal my idea and then implement it and take credit, but that we really figure out, how do we honor each other in a space? And I hate to be so prescriptive, but I tell you, our timers are off. There are internal clocks about how much time we take up is often defined by language access, class, sex, a sexual orientation, race. All of that is defining who feels authorized to speak and who gets to be validated for their thoughts and thinking. So we need structures, literally structures in our families and in our workplaces that interrupt those patterns, not because we're bad people, but because we've all been socialized in societies where there's oppression and we are clueless. We're oblivious to how they play out when we're on the non-target side,
All right, and we want to thank you so much for that, Nanci. And with the 1.5 minutes that we have left, Maxine, I don't know if you want to answer that question or you want to give us an idea of 1, registration, 2, how people can contact, and 3, what the significance of this conference happening in one day. So take a choice. We have the same amount of time. Decide what you're doing with it.
I think we'll do all. So register the conference at maxineattong.com, or you can send us an email at leadingwithequity@gmail.com, or you can give me a call at 724-7642. So that's one, right, DK? The second thing is what we're hoping to do with this conversation. This conversation launches our equity circles as well. We are going to continue this conversation throughout the year because we know the effects of the pandemic will not leave us with one conference. So we are going to be there I am going to be there to reinforce, to encourage people throughout the months. Once you come to the conference, you have access to our monthly webinars. And the third thing I want to share with everybody is that the proceeds from this conference, they really go to jumpstart our youth leadership development programs, which we started last year. And we want to bring more young people into leadership. And Nanci explained perfectly why. They are less hurt, and therefore they are a lot more clearer. And what would it be like if we were to give them the tools to fuel their leadership spark, so that together we can bring change through the systems that we live, play, and work within.
Thank you very much, Maxine Attong, Nanci Jimenéz, and Dr. Rama Naidu. And yes, you did it in time. I feel like I just bowl a full toss and boom, you locked me out. But thank you very much, and we look forward for great things coming from this on the 29th and beyond. And we want to thank you on behalf of the entire news team for being a part of the conversation. Have a good evening.